The Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so pleased to rise today to speak to issues concerning our Canadian Armed Forces veterans in response to the Opposition Supply Day motion put forward by my colleague from Courtenay, Alberni. I enjoy serving with him on the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, and I appreciate the opportunities that we have to collaborate in ways that have the potential to see our veterans better served if the government were to implement our recommendations. The motion before us states that in the opinion of the House, the government should automatically carry forward all annual lapsed spending at the Department of Veterans Affairs to the next fiscal year for the sole purpose of improving services for Canadian veterans until the department meets or exceeds its 24 self-identified service standards. Well, today, in response to this motion, we've heard from the Liberals, and they tell us that lapsed funding does not result in anyone receiving less than they should. They've said it's just how the government keeps its books. They've said that nothing nefarious is going on. They explain that most spending at Veterans Affairs is statutory, and that the government needs to be prepared to cover the cost of these benefits, whether 10 or 10,000 eligible veterans make a claim. They've advised us that each year the spending estimates for Veterans Affairs are put before this House based predominantly on those very same statutory requirements. In other words, the funding that has lapsed will be in the spending estimates this year and the year after that and the year after that. So they're saying that this motion is a moot point. And actually, for the most part, they are right. But I know they hope veterans will forget that when in opposition, they sung a very different tune. It's true, the funding for Veterans Affairs is regulated by statute. It seems the Minister of Veterans Affairs is aware of this fact now. The other day, he was explaining to Global News that he is statutorily obligated to provide programs and services owed to veterans, so any lapsed funding will not affect services to veterans. And a Veterans Affairs spokesperson agreed with the minister and said lapsed funding does not result in anyone receiving less than they should. It is simply an administrative process. Services from Veterans Affairs Department under the Liberals is demand-driven, just as it was during the previous Conservative government. The hypocrisy here, Mr. Speaker, is that when the same thing happened in the past, they falsely claimed that the then government was stealing from veterans. Now, when they find themselves in government and faced with the exact same situation, Speaker, they say they are not stealing, they are following an administrative process. I'm not going to come to this House today and claim that lapsed funding in the Veterans Affairs Department under the Liberal government is somehow stealing from veterans, because it's not, and it never was. But Speaker, I will ask the Minister, now that he and the Liberal government are aware of how Veterans Affairs budgets work, will they apologize for accusing my former colleagues of thievery? Will they apologize to Canadians for completely misrepresenting in the past how this Veterans Affairs budget works? Will they apologize to veterans for the stress they caused them by suggesting that the former government was taking money from their benefits when they knew it wasn't true? The department makes estimates for what it expects to spend, and in the event that all the money is not spent, it lapses. The way the department is set up, it's required to have enough money for the demands of our veterans each and every year. So this motion by the member from Courtenay, Alberni is somewhat mute. However, there are many areas of concern where my colleague and I are of one mind that I believe are the force behind his intent today. What are the reasons, Mr. Speaker, that this funding remains there at the end of the budget year? Why does it fail to reach veterans? Well, I would suggest there are two significant reasons why that happens. One is incredible inefficiencies within the department, an inability when they create programs to get them through the door and out to the veterans. And the other reason is a significant culture of denial. Always, a veteran has to fight for something that they should be able to receive without an increased level in their mental health problems, without an increased level of PTSD in struggling through the transition process, and without an increase, Mr. Speaker, in the number of veterans who contemplate or actually go through with suicide and homicides because they simply cannot take another problem added on to the problems they're already facing. For example, the fact that 37 million taxpayer dollars abused by this Prime Minister to fight veterans in court was a blow to the gut, the hearts, and the minds of our veterans. When asked why we are fighting certain veteran groups in court, the Prime Minister responded at the Edmonton Town Hall in February of 2018 with this statement: because they are asking for more than we are able to give. Speaker, the previous Conservative Minister of Veterans Affairs had worked with Equitas, firing the government lawyer and instead putting the case in abeyance, with the goodwill to work together to move towards acceptable solutions to improve outcomes for injured veterans as they were requesting. Speaker, I do believe that the outcomes that this motion is trying to achieve are very important. I am very disturbed by the increasing backlog of applications for disability benefits. Despite the $10 billion the minister is always quoting, the backlog is 29,000 and growing. Speaker, this government sees themselves as succeeding because they indicate that cases are being processed and moved to VRAB, the Veterans Review and Appeal Board, more quickly. How could any government claim this as a success? That basically an initial request from a veteran is moving more quickly to an appeal board where once again they have to go through the process of applying and requesting that funding, where in most cases, once they make it through that process, it is provided. Why are we putting our veterans through this added difficulty that causes them great angst and only means that they are not receiving their funding or their services in a timely manner? When VAC finally communicates to Canadian Armed Force members, veterans, and their families using veteran-centric plain language, when VAC ensures every veteran has a clear understanding of every benefit they qualify for upon release and every benefit they may need to access over time, we will be on the road to succeeding to care more effectively and efficiently for our veterans. I see one of the biggest challenges to veterans receiving their benefits is an overcomplicated chain of command where upper management does not embrace change and case managers are not empowered to do what is best for veterans as quickly as possible. There does not appear to be a desire to work with DND to create a seamless transition for our veterans, if it means a change to the structure or the composition of VAC. There continues to be a culture that insists VAC must determine if medical release is due to service before VAC will provide benefits, when DND already makes the determination when a member no longer meets universality of service and they're released. Yes, future decisions by VAC will need to be made as a veteran ages, of course, but upon release, there is complete clarity already provided by DND whether or not they qualify for services from VAC based on being medically released. It's already there. At release, timely service and peace of mind for an injured veteran should be the determining factors, not protecting the turf of a department. The truth is, the majority of the cohort of case managers that the Liberals claim they have put in place 400 of those 470 were already budgeted for in the previous Conservative government. At the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, we heard that case managers are not properly trained and up to speed on veterans' benefits. They're overworked, stressed, and often feeling helplessly caught between veterans in dismay and those up the chain of demand. Sorry, that should be chain of command, but maybe that was a Freudian slip. I don't know. VAC needs to stop operating like an insurance program. VAC needs to be transparent in what it's actually providing to veterans. Today, we heard that one of the members of the Liberal Party talk about the education benefit. $40,000 for someone who has served for 6 years and $80,000 for someone who has served for 12. Unfortunately, that is not transparent conversation or presentation to veterans or to Canadians, because those funds are actually a taxable benefit. So when a veteran thinks that they're going to get $40,000 to go to school, at the end of the year they find out, wait a minute, that's taxable benefit and they owe the government back in taxes for that benefit. I wonder if the government has come to any decision as to how much of that benefit they hand out they actually claw back in that taxable benefit that they get back through taxes from our veterans. It's misleading, I guess is what I'm trying to say, Mr. Speaker. As well, the member across the way said that with that education benefit, they get to go to the school of their choice. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you standing here today, I have been approached by many veterans who went to take advantage of that program. Actually, one of them that was actually okayed to go ahead, registered with the institution they wanted to go to, and then heard back through the case manager who had been told by the higher-ups that, sorry, you have to tell this individual, we don't think that school qualifies. Devastating. As well, the emergency funds that are available. The member across the way said that that is available 24/7. What he's saying is that you can call in 24/7, but he didn't tell truthfully how long it takes for the department to actually get those funds out the door to a veteran that is in an emergency crisis situation. I think our committee should take a look at that. Under no circumstances should the men and women who served, came home physically or mentally injured, find themselves fighting for benefits that they were told would be there for them and their families when they signed on, willing to die for their country. The minister has indicated on numerous occasions that the backlog is because veterans are better informed and have more services to apply for. Well, I do hope that there's a certain amount of truth to that, Mr. Speaker. However, in actuality, what also isn't being said is that the backlog is going to get even worse, as VAC is facing a significant increase of service members ready to retire now after serving 25 years. They are not prepared. Mr. Speaker, it's no secret that there's no clarity for veterans or service and case managers with the rollout fast approaching of the so-called pension for life. Their plan actually provides no new funds, instead consolidating and rolling in existing benefits. An article in Esprit de Corps, Canadian military magazine, dated April 18, 2018, Sean Brewer and Robert Smole, comparing the old Pension Act and the Liberals' new so-called pension for life, stated this quote, "Furthermore, under the same category of non-taxable benefits for pain and suffering, injured veterans will have a choice between a lump sum payment up to $360,000 and a monthly pension for life up to a maximum of $1,150 to compensate for their injuries. There are no additional amounts for spouses or children. The average pension for life likely will be around $200 per month. For the 60,000 veteran recipients still receiving the Pension Act, They're paid an average of $680 per month, plus amounts for spouses and children, end quote. Mr. Speaker, in the announcement of their budget for 2018 with the new lifelong pension included, the example that was given there was of someone who had served their full 25 years and ended up at the last moment having a very horrific injury where they had major loss of limbs. That individual qualifies for the maximum amount. There are many, many of our boots on the ground that get injured and never make it to 25 years. It is misleading in that document. Another glaring problem is the inability of VAC to administer funds in a timely manner. One example of which is actually the Emergency Relief Fund. It actually takes days, not hours, to get to a veteran in a crisis situation. I'm going to mention an organization, Veterans Helping Veterans, called Veterans Emergency Transition Services, known as Vets Canada. It's operated by Veterans for Veterans, a nonprofit corporation with volunteers across Canada. They provide emergency aid and comfort to veterans that are in crisis and who are at risk of becoming homeless. If a veteran or someone on their behalf reaches out to Vets Canada, they can have a person at their door very quickly with help. If they get a call about a homeless veteran, they work that same day to get them off the street. The new Vets Canada drop-in centre is just blocks from Parliament Hill, and it is so effective in its mandate that VAC referred 65 of their emergency clients to them in their first 2 months of operation. There are other organizations here, Mr. Speaker, that I would like to speak to. I don't know how much time I have left. 3 minutes? Okay. I will come back to them possibly in answers to my questions. The problem at Veterans Affairs is not a lack of money. We all know that the minister says he has $10 billion to spend because he says that every opportunity he has to say so. Yet it seems the desire of this government is to actually get dollars out the door elsewhere, providing taxpayer dollars to colonize overseas countries to submit to their attestation values, paying out terrorists, helping murderers, rather than focusing on our veterans, elderly, and those working hard to join the middle class. Mr. Speaker, veterans want to see more veterans as caseworkers so that they're talking to people that understand military service and speak their language. They want transparency when they file a claim with an honest, accurate estimation as to how long it's going to take. Veterans want to be made aware of available services. For example, I recently returned from a committee trip up north and discovered 89% of our Canadian Rangers are not aware of their Canadian Armed Force health care entitlements or their veterans benefits. An excellent recommendation came forward that up in the north that a VAC service agent simply be included with the existing team of Canadian Services people in Yellowknife. Speaker, understanding Veterans Affairs services needs to start shortly after enlistment with ongoing contact so that when the veteran retires or is released from the Canadian Armed Forces and becomes a veteran, he or she is armed and trained with the clear, concise information that empowers them to access everything they need and deserve as they transition from serving in our military. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Coast Bays, Central Notre Dame.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, back to your regularly scheduled programming. I want to thank the member from Yorkton Melville. I want to make a few comments off the top. At the beginning of her speech, when she described the statutory elements that the minister goes through when administering this department, and I appreciate the comments that it was well researched, it was well done. She outlined the way we do things here. And as a member of Parliament, in a nonpartisan way, I say thank you very much for that. One of the, comparing the former administration, now this one of the glaring omissions to me was about, obviously I'm reticent to do this because I know a lot of people get into this thing, well, this is what you did, this is what you did, that sort of thing. But I think the glaring omission here, which should be looked at, which is the fact of the point of entry for a particular veteran. I say this from experience, not as a veteran, but for someone who has dealt with veterans, in the sense that when they want to reach out to someone, they're going through major issues, there's always the element in government, when you want to reach out to a government department, where do I go? Because so many government departments are siloed into different areas that a lot of people get confused as to direction if they don't find it from their local member of parliament. One of the things that we did was we transitioned back to a point of entry that was more familiar to a veteran in the sense of the Veterans Affairs offices, as opposed to a regular type of bureaucratic person. No offense to them. So my question is basically, and sorry if my speech is interrupting the NDP heckling, but my question is simply about that point had to be done in that circumstance, which was different from the last administration.
For Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for his question, his speech and his question. In fairness, I think it's very important that we reach out to veterans in a way that is accessible to them. And whenever there's change, it is difficult. I make note that the office was reopened, one of them in my province, and I had veterans come and talk to me. The frustration was that no one came to talk to them about reopening them. This is the government that consults on all things. And they actually said, you know what? It's downtown. They put it back where it was. It's downtown in the middle of a very busy area. There's no parking. We can't get upstairs. And we really liked it where it was in the mall when it was next involved with Service Canada. Up north with Yellowknife, they've said, why don't you have someone come and be part of Service Canada up here so we have an expert on the ground. Opening up offices across the south here, reopening them. I haven't seen any results from that opening to see what it's cost the government or how effective it's been. I know there are some veterans that still very much prefer face-to-face, but even in those offices, I've heard they usually respond by telephone call. Thank you.
The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When veterans signed up, the people who went from my region, they didn't read the small print. They served their country, they took the risks. They came back, they expected that there was a contract for life, something that this present government has argued in court that there is no moral contract for life. But what I've seen over my 15 years in Parliament is that politicians always love to stand by veterans on Remembrance Day and then ignore them for the rest of the year. We saw the previous government that went ahead with the lump sum pensions that we knew were going to be problematic. We learned that there's a $165 million shortfall to veterans' pensions under the previous government. But the most staggering thing that we see again and again is governments announce funds for veterans, then they re-announce it, and then they announce it a third time, and then just to be secure, they thank themselves for announcing it. And then the money goes back to Treasury Board and isn't spent. And veterans are ripped off and their families are ripped off. So we have an opportunity in this House to do something right, to say if the money is committed to veteran services, it's going to be spent at veteran services, and it's not going to be clawed back. The Parliamentary Budget Officer says this is possible. We could make this change in this Parliament. I'd like to ask the Conservative Party if they will be standing with us to support veterans when this motion is passed in the House. Will they support us and veterans, or will they stand with the present government that continues to fight veterans on their basic pension rights?
Honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Mr. Speaker, veterans are incredibly important to Canadians, and serving on the committee for Veterans Affairs and as shadow deputy critic, this is probably one of the most emotional files in the House of Commons. And that's why I'm very pleased to say today that everyone on this side of the floor represented in the Conservative Party of Canada will be voting in support of this motion.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, I had the privilege and the honour of actually serving in the Canadian Forces for just over 3 years. And, when I reflect in terms of Stephen Harper, when he was Prime Minister, and compared to what we've witnessed over the last 3 years, I believe that our veterans as a whole, Mr. Speaker, are quite satisfied in terms of to the degree in which this government is going out of its way to ensure that all retiring veterans, that veterans in general are getting the type of support that is actually necessary, Mr. Speaker. We have invested literally hundreds of millions of dollars. We have reopened offices for veterans. There's a lot of good news that is out there, and the simple message that I would try to communicate today to those that might be following the debate is that, look, if there's a veteran and you're aware of a veteran not getting the services that they require, or the pension issues being unresolved, to bring it to the attention of the department in one form or another. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to say as well that I hear from a great number of veterans, and their frustration is with the very department that you're saying to bring their concerns to. And that again shows that we have work to do here in making sure that the VAC is there to serve veterans and not to serve itself. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to ask a rhetorical question. Now that the Liberal government is aware of how Veterans Affairs budgets work, are they prepared to apologize for accusing my former colleagues of thievery?
Questions and comments. Cathay Wagantall, the Honourable Member for Markham Unionville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the member for Yorkton, Melbourne, for a wonderful, heartfelt speech regarding the veteran. My question is simple and short. When Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in the third party, and he promised the veterans they never have to fight. They never have to fight in the government in the court. Now, after $38 billion spent over the last 2 years, what happened today?
Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague, my previous seatmate, Miss sitting beside you, for his very good question. A lot of what this government says and what it does not, it doesn't, it's not compatible. A number of promises that were made during the last election were made to our veterans through actually significant consultation with them, very much giving them the impression that they were heard, and it was even in writing when they spoke with those veterans what they were prepared to do. And one of them was that they would never take them to court, that they should not have to face their government in court. And that came right from the mouth and the heart of the Prime Minister of the Liberal government. They are so upset, hurt, angry with what this government has done in basically completely turning their back on that promise that they made to them. And over again, they are seeing them truly live out the statement that the Prime Minister made, that the veterans are just asking for too much, and yet they have the money to send $650 million overseas to battle other countries in the court on their views on different values. They have the money to pay off a convicted terrorist. They have the money to give veterans funding to a convicted cop killer. There's no question, Mr. Speaker, that this government is not on the right track when it comes to caring for our veterans.